Hello and welcome to this presentation about teaching writing. In this presentation I will talk a little bit about the importance of writing, why we should teach writing in school. Then I will go on to discuss the concept of writing itself, what it is. Thirdly, I will mention what the subject curriculum says about writing. And then I will go on to discuss different types of writing before I end with some practical examples. Jeremy Harmer has said that of all the skills, writing is the one that teachers and learners seem most reluctant to focus on because it requires them to make special efforts. As a result, it sometimes tends to be neglected. So what Harmer is saying here is that there seems to be a tendency for teachers to focus on other things than writing. And our experience at the university college level is that students who start studying here, they are typically better at speaking than writing. And it may seem that some teachers are focusing more on speaking than writing. But what we hope to achieve in this course is to help you acquire knowledge and to learn about some tools that you can use for teaching writing in primary school. When it comes to the concept of writing and what it is, there are different theoretical perspectives on this. One way to look at writing is to say that it belongs to the productive skills. This is a view that we typically find with scholars such as Stephen Krashen and Merrill Swain, who talk about input and output. So writing then is sort of together with speaking goes as one of those productive skills, whereas listening and reading will be those receptive skills. Another way to look upon this is to say that writing belongs with reading in what can be said to be written communication. This is a view that you find in the subject curriculum. The subject curriculum distinguishes between oral communication and written communication. So that's a that's a different way of looking at the concept of reading. Now it doesn't really matter how we distinguish these different terms, but it's important to have them as a backdrop for understanding how we can develop good writing skills in our pupils. And more specifically, the English subject curriculum says that being able to express oneself in writing in English means being able to express ideas and opinions in an understandable and purposeful manner using written English. Writing is also a tool for language learning. The development of writing proficiency in English involves learning orthography, meaning spelling, and developing a more extensive repertoire of English words and linguistic structures. So what the curriculum says here is that writing can be understood in two ways. On the one hand, it is about expressing ideas and opinions in writing, and on the other hand, writing is seen as a tool for language learning. I will return to this point later in the presentation. Moreover, it's important to be aware of the fact that writing is regarded as a basic skill in the subject curriculum. And this is also one of the reasons why it is important that we don't neglect it. So it's important that we teach this skill because pupils will need it. Now, writing is a complex skill. As Munn and Myhre point out, it requires a number of sub-skills in order to master it adequately. First of all, it relates to, or it requires the skill of forming letters when you're writing by hand, for example. Or it can be finding the right letters on the keyboard when you're using a computer, for example. Secondly, writing requires the skill of finding which words and phrases to use. So you need to have a certain vocabulary in order to write well. Thirdly, you need to have the skill of spelling and using punctuation marks. And fourthly, you need the skill of putting those words and phrases and punctuations logically together in a text. So you need to be able to have what we call discourse skills, or the skills of writing coherent texts that stick logically together. Finally, there is this skill of organizing ideas into a coherent whole, using appropriate titles and appropriate transitions from one paragraph to the next. Now, if you look at the little picture here, which is funny, but the interesting thing is that there is not very much which is lacking here. Actually, there is only one little letter which causes this to be a wrong sentence. So if the writer here had included the letter D, then the sentence would have been perfect. Violators will be fined. So you can see that sometimes there is a very fine balance between successful writing and unsuccessful writing. Now, I think it's important here to mention the concept of literacy, because traditionally there has been focus on writing as meaning the ability to put letters down on paper in print, such as the picture in the right hand corner here shows. But today we need to understand writing or literacy as something more complex. The traditional definition of literacy is that literacy is the ability to read and write. Today, however, as Jeremy Harmer has pointed out, literacy is seen as significantly more complex, located as it is in social contexts and increasingly in the online world. So with the introduction of the internet and computers and other digital technology, writing is now becoming more complex. So it's no longer just a matter of finding the right words and using the right letters on paper. It's also a matter of using appropriate pictures or appropriate images like emojis, for example, or using appropriate frames and appropriate colors, and so on and so forth. So that's why I put here at the end of the slide, literacy today is regarded more like the creation and interpretation of multimodal texts. Multimodal text, just like this PowerPoint slide that you're now watching. I'm using printed letters, numbers, but I'm also using frames, as you can see on top. We're using pictures and so on. Now, the concept of literacy is also connected to the idea of genre. So as Harmer says, the concept of genre, is highly bound up with literacy. And genre can be said to be the norms of different kinds of writing. And this is something we should alert our students to, at least when they progress through the levels. So they should be made aware of different types of genres, like telltales, poems, fairy tales, realistic fiction, references, and so on. Because the genre will decide how a good text is to be written. Okay, I mentioned when I referred to the curriculum that the curriculum looks at writing in two different ways. One way as the creation of meaning through text, and the other way is to say that writing is a tool for learning a language. And this is one very common way of looking at writing in literature. First of all, we may talk about writing for learning, in which writing is intended to help pupils learn and practice the language. So it's about learning the language. For example, when you tell your students to write 3 sentences using going to, I'm going to sleep, I'm going to eat, I'm going to do my homework, that would be an instance of using writing to practice the language, learning the language. Secondly, you may talk about writing for writing, in which you, sorry about that, writing for writing, which is intended to build the pupil's writing skills. So it's not about practicing the language, but it's in fact about practicing writing skills. How to develop good syntax, genre knowledge, how to structure the text well, and so on. And this is interesting for the way that we work with language in the classroom. And here we may distinguish 3 types of writing activities, and I'm going to elaborate on them as I go along. First of all, there is what we call controlled writing. Then there is what we can call guided writing. And finally, there is what has been referred to as free writing. And I'll take them now in turn. If you look at controlled writing first, controlled writing activities are activities where pupils just copy words. And one such controlled writing activity is what we call tracing. And this means that, such as in this case, we have already made the letters by using dotted lines. And by using these dotted lines, the pupils can very easily write the words. They're just overwriting those dotted lines. And then they can practice both their orthographic skills, learning the letters, but also their motor skills, how to physically write them on paper. So that's the simplest form of a writing activity. A slightly more complex writing activity is copying. It's not very complex, but it's slightly more complex than tracing. It means that the pupils, they write the letters themselves, but then they need model words or model text. So in this case, they can just copy the M from Monday onto this little line here. And then continue to writing those letters. Thirdly, there is what is referred to as visualized words, which means that you actually visualize the word that they are to write. Egg, for example, can be visualized as an egg. The word long can be visualized as a long word. Short as a short. An arrow can be visualized by drawing an arrow around the word, and so on. So one very nice way of practicing not just the spelling skills, but also vocabulary to help them remember. What are we talking about here? Fourthly, there is matching text and picture. This is a very common task, which is very frequently used in textbooks and activity books. In this case, I've taken this from an online resource site, but the principle is quite simple. The pupils are asked to copy the words onto the right picture. So this means that they not only have to understand, but they have to copy to see which words, which pictures or images do these words match with. So fly, beetle, caterpillar, and so And then fifthly, you have weather reports, for example, something you can stick to the whiteboard and you can write every day. Today's Wednesday, the 14th of June, and the weather is very hot. And then you can change it the next day. Now, we move from controlled writing activities to guided writing activities, which are slightly more complicated. And guided writing activities, they can be, for example, filling in activities. And filling in activities, they consist of activities or exercises where the students add missing words to a text. They can add missing words such as in songs and rhymes, in picture stories. It can be completing a text or dictating half a sentence. You take the first one here, missing words in the songs and rhymes. I've taken this now from Twinkle Twinkle, and they can just put in the words twinkle twinkle little star, how I wonder what you are, up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. So they have to fill in those missing words. Or as in this little picture from Twinkle Twinkle, where the pupils have to replace the images with the words. The dog is black, the cat is white, they live in a house with me. Secondly, another type of guided writing activity can be parallel writing. And parallel writing means that you, as the teacher, have to provide a model text. And then the pupils can create similar text, similar patterns of text. For example, postcards or letters or invitations or email or reports. And in this case, you can see an invitation. Please come to my party at so-and-so on such and such a date at this and that time. And very nice for children to do, and usually motivating and inspiring for them because it can be very realistic. Then I have an example of an email. This is something that I just made. It can be anything, but let's say that you want the pupils to write an email to the headmaster for some reason. For example, such as in this case, Dear Miss Berg, we need some help. Our classroom is very cold in the mornings. Yesterday the temperature was as low as 18 degrees Celsius. Many pupils put on their jackets to stay warm. We think that the heater is broken. Can you please help us? Or something like that. Then there is dictation, which I also mentioned previously. Munden and Myhre, they have some good suggestions for dictation. They're worth looking at in chapter 7. And also Munden in Engelsk på mellomtrinnet. It's very worthwhile looking at what she says about dictation. She's writing extensively about this topic. And they say that you should, when you're working with dictation, you should present the words before the dictation, or use words that have occurred in a text that has been used recently, so that the pupils are familiar with the words. Secondly, they advise you to use different types of word classes: nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, pronouns. And thirdly, to read at an appropriate pace, not too slow, not too fast. And always present the words in context, not just single words, but make sure to present them in context. And then dividing sentences or longer phrases into chunks can be a good idea. So in this case, you would have to read fairly slowly and repeating these chunks. For example, the old dog, and then you repeat as many times as necessary. I would say 3 would be fine. Loves to go swimming. Loves to go swimming, and then continue in this pace or at the appropriate pace. You will have to, of course, differentiate according to the level. And finally, Munden and Myhre, they advise you to challenge the children to get as many words correctly as possible. because they should be intrigued to work persistently and to get things right, and they usually like that. Finally, there are the free writing activities, and these can be also different. Can be in different forms of free writing activities, such as pupils expressing ideas to communicate with a reader. Well, that's the overall idea of it. So we have now progressed from controlled writing activities, which are quite simple, then through those guided writing activities, which are more complicated, and then now to free writing, which means that the pupils are on their own in the writing. But as many have touched upon, when it comes to free writing, pupils will sometimes need information about, for example, what kind of a text it is, the function of the text. Is it an informative text? It is meant to inform, or is it meant to entertain, or is it meant to inquire information, to ask questions, or what is the purpose? What is the function? Secondly, they may need help in how to write the text, what kind of words and phrases to use, or how to make an outline, how to organize the text. Do we need an introduction? What is the genre, for example? Then you may have to provide them with ideas for how to write a text. What kind of things should we put in this text? And finally, you may have to help them with what kind of language to use. Should it be formal? Should it be informal? And so on. Examples of free writing activities can be labeling, can be lists, can be writing a story with different endings. Sometimes in textbooks and in other instances, you can ask children or the pupils to write a different ending to a story. That's usually quite motivating. You have factual text also making also in book, and then there is digital storytelling, which is usually something that students very much enjoy. So if you want to try this, you can download software programs such as PhotoStory or iMovie, and they shouldn't be too difficult to get access to. And then you let the pupils find some pictures, and then they can read in sound files to each picture to make a little story. It's usually motivating. Yeah, just to show you, the other day I just tried for myself. I was pretending to be a second grader, and I tried to make a drawing on my guitar. It's not very beautiful, but anyway, something that I'm interested in. And I tried to label the different parts of the guitar, and actually I found that there were different words that I didn't know, such as tailpiece and nut. So even for lecturers of English, labeling activities can be a good learning experience. Okay, then before I round up, I just want to say something about writing strategies. I've talked about the importance of metacognition, the ability to be conscious about learning and conscious about language use, speaking, writing, reading. So we need to say something about language strategies or strategies related to writing. A writing strategy can be defined as a strategy can be defined as deliberate thinking about some aspect of the writing process. So it means that the pupils are conscious, deliberate about their writing, planning their writing, or actually writing, or afterwards summing up or looking at the text in retrospect. Examples of writing strategies can be knowing how and when to write a title. Do we need to write a title in a factual text about my hometown? Do we need it in a letter? Do we need it in a text message, a mobile phone text message? It can be checking the spelling of unfamiliar words. This, I think, is something that you should encourage your pupils to do regularly. When they have finished writing, you can ask them, have you now checked the spelling of unfamiliar words? Considering genre-specific vocabulary, what kind of a genre is this? Are we writing a recipe, or are we writing a Twitter message, or whatever is it? And does this vocabulary fit the genre? Now we're talking about higher levels of writing. We're not talking about first or second graders, but higher levels. And also at high levels, thinking consciously about the purpose and the audience of a text. Are we writing according to the purpose and the audience? And finally, comparing and contrasting differences between English and Norwegian. And that's something that we talked about before. Meryl Swain, she says it's important to think about meta-linguistic awareness. Comparing and contrasting English and Norwegian can be a good strategy. For example, what is the equivalent form of the ing form, the English ing form? Do we have any equivalent form in Norwegian? You can ask the pupils to look at differences in collocations and idioms, those words sticking together. A collocation can be to make a mistake. That's a collocation. Or an idiom, raining cats and dogs. Do we have any Norwegian equivalent expressions? A lot of, what do we say in Norwegian? We do not say en masse av. That's not something we say. So ask them to be conscious of those collocations, those words sticking together, or idioms. Finally, I want to end this presentation on this note, quoting Mundna Myhre, or referring to Mundna Myhre, who emphasized the importance of systematic work, working systematically with writing from the very early stages. That's important in order to develop good writing skills. And this is something I'm now linked to what John Hattie says about good learning processes. There is evidence that systematic language learning is important for improving skills and knowledge. So working systematically is something that we encourage you to do. Okay, that's all I had for this presentation. Thank you very much.